Okay, so turn one. I'm braking a few meters after the turn-in marker, or whatever you want to call that marker on the right side, on the left side. Set around here is where I would get on the brakes, but I'm very, very, very light on the brake. Then I even trail brake a tiny bit to get the car to turn. But really, you want to turn in fairly early, probably a little bit earlier than you think for this corner, and ideally just get enough rotation before the apex that by the time you get to the actual curb, the actual apex curbing, by around this point you should be able to get completely back on the throttle. You really don't want to carry too much speed in and then have to wait too long to get on the throttle. And on exit, you can use all of the curb and all of the grass grade after that. Just don't touch the AstroTurf beyond that because it's a little bit slippery. Yes, I think by the end of the start-finish straight, you do get up to fifth gear, I think, if I remember correctly. But anyways, I just shift down to fourth and keep fourth through turn one. And then on the way to turn two, I'll shift up into fifth. So I'll be in fifth gear going into turn two. And really, you don't really need to use the whole width of the track because it's pretty wide. You'll just end up covering a little bit extra distance, which will hurt you by a couple of hundredths of a second. But you can keep to the center of the track. Turn in for turn two and try to keep the car pretty far to the left of the track before you sort of straight line it into turn three. You're only turning a little bit, and what I like to do is just very lightly brake as I turn in at around this point, and I'll shift down into fourth gear as I brake and turn in all at the same time. And you really want to abuse as much of the inside of this corners as you can. You want to use the whole curb, and you want to use all of the grass grade beyond that. And through here, I think it might help a lot of you guys to be ready to use a little bit of throttle as you go over this curb, just to settle the rear of the car and make sure your car is very, very stable for the hard braking coming up for turn four. And really, that's probably the most important part of this section. You really want to not only have your wheel completely straight before you start braking, but also make sure the car is stable. So even if your wheel is straight, the car could be sliding a tiny bit, and if you hit the brakes pretty hard, it's gonna make that way, way worse, and you might spin out. So really, just using a little bit of throttle through here, not using it automatically, but just getting a feel for it, and using it whenever you feel the rear of the car is sliding around too much. Just using that and make sure you have the wheel straight, and then you can, by the time you get off that apex curb, maybe a few meters after that is where I typically get on the brakes for turn four. And again, obviously, you want to be braking in a perfectly straight line, aiming at that outside curb, and I'll be dropping down 2 gears, so from fourth to third and then to second. And then the turn in for turn four is pretty late because it's very, very, very important to be really, really early on the throttle. So ideally, you want to be on the throttle by the time you go over that apex curve, not after it. So if you turn in too early, you'll gain a bit of time going through the corner itself, but you'll lose more than that going down the straight afterwards. So try to turn in a little bit later, and by this point, by the time you apex, you should be able to get on the throttle completely. And watch out for those cones, because not only will you get an off track if you hit them, but they'll also damage your front wing for some reason. So be wary of those. All right. So turn 5, the hairpin. It's very important. I think the most important part for this corner is just to aim your car properly before you start braking. And I think the best reference is just the edge of the track here. So I'd start braking just a little bit, or just at the point where that bit of pavement starts on the left side. So that would be my braking reference. And and you really want to angle the car to have it almost parallel to the edge of the track at this point. Maybe a little bit further towards the outside, but not much. So at around this angle and around this point is where I would start a brake and shift down all the way down into second gear. So before turn-in, it's also pretty similar to turn 4. It's really important here to turn in quite late and really apex this corner very, very late, just so that you can get on the throttle very, very early and with the car pretty straight as well. And really, you don't really want to turn in too early and be riding that inside curb the whole way around. Really, you want to turn in late, and really the only point where you get anywhere close the actual curbing is right where the curb ends and the grass grate starts. So right here is where my apex would be, and I'd already be on the throttle by that point. And on exit, you can use all of this exit curve, just don't go beyond onto the pavement after that. Alright, so turn 6, turning in just before you go through the bridge. It'll typically lift just before I get to the apex curving for turn 6. And again, as I've mentioned in other walkthroughs, you really want to lift as you're already turning in, and also make sure the lift is as quick and as aggressive as you can, just to make the weight transfer a bit more aggressive and get a tiny bit more rotation. So by the end, this curve you should be able to get back on the throttle, and you should be able to get back almost the full way back to the right side of the track. So you'll almost be right on the white line before you turn in for turn 7. So at around this point, maybe a few meters after the, I'll go back a little bit. It's pretty hard to get a reference for braking and turning in for this corner. I typically just simply start braking a few meters after the second white line on the outside merges with the actual white line that delimits the track. So just a few meters after that, so at around here is where I would typically start braking, drop down from 4th into 3rd. And you want to also turn in pretty early, and you'll find you'll ride this curve for a little bit, and you can get on the throttle quite early, a lot earlier than you expect. Use all of the space on the outside after turn 7. And for turn 8, I'm using that darker bit of the grass crate on the right side as a braking reference. So right around here, as I go over it, is where I would start braking. And again, this is a corner where you wanna turn in an apex at quite late. Obviously not because you have a long straight after it, but you want to apex it late just so that you can set up the last corner better, which does have a long straight after it. So turn in fairly late, and you'll only be getting into the curb by around this point. So a little bit after the actual green and the sausage curb start on the left side. So around this point is where you'd reach that curbing. And you want to get on the throttle early, but not too early, so that you don't end up all the way on the right side of the track. You sort of want to keep this sort of, you don't want to go any further to the inside of the track is this, just so that you can set up the last corner a little bit better. And for the last corner, I think I'm still not completely sure which is the fastest way around it, but for the moment, what I'm doing, because I find the corner sort of, the radius of the corner decreases a little bit as you go around it. So I find it's a little bit easier and a lot more consistent to, instead of treating it like a double apex, where you're getting really close to that inside curb on entry, then going wide, and then coming back into the curbing once again before you exit. I find it's a little bit better to just avoid trying to apex it at the beginning and sort of keeping this position as I start braking and turning. And as I go around the corner and the car naturally slows down with the scrub, you'll find it'll sort of tuck in and get a little bit closer to the inside. I think a good tip for this corner, especially for people that are running really narrow fields of view where you can't see any of the exit curbing. For those people, like me, it's very hard to gauge where you can get back on the throttle simply because you can't see much beyond the corner itself. I find it's a pretty good reference. Pretty good for reference is that sort of spot of dried up oil right in front of my car. I think that's a pretty good reference to let you know where you should be able to get back completely on the throttle for the exit of the corner. So around here, again in second gear, you'd be completely on the throttle, and you don't want to ride too much of this curbing. Even though it doesn't look that high, the car might start to wheel spin a little bit, and you'll lose a bit of speed going down the straight. After that, you want to use the space on exit, and that would be the lap. Well, except for this last corner, which if there are any Magic fans out there, check this out. Whoa. Whoa.
I'd just like to say thank you again to Johnny for taking the time to give us a walkthrough. If you would like more help from Johnny, he also does private coaching sessions. You can find his contact information down below in the description if you're interested.
I'll do a fast lap. I'll just get back round, start the flying lap. All right. That was a decent lap for colder tires.